What if the moment you think your life is ending is the same moment someone is sent to save you? Ruth Winslow stood where 4 lonely roads met in the cold Montana wind. Her shadow stretched long across the frozen dirt. Her boots were splitting, her shawl full of holes, and the small baby in her arms had stopped crying because the cold had taken even her voice. She had named the baby Hope, though hope felt like a word from another world now. Ruth had been walking since dawn. Every step felt like the last one she had left in her. She knew she would not survive the night outside, but her legs kept moving because stopping meant giving up. She was young, but sorrow had carved deep lines into her face. The wind cut through her clothes and burned her skin, but she didn't slow down. She just held the baby tighter against her chest. Then she heard hoofbeats. A rider came from the east through the blowing snow. Grant McCoy sat tall on his horse, steady and calm. He was a broad man, strong, with a face shaped by years of work and loss. Though he owned half the timber mills in Montana, he dressed like any rancher. A worn coat, a dusty hat, boots that had worked hard. Nothing fancy, nothing loud. He stopped his horse 10 feet from her. Ruth didn't beg. She had begged at the boarding house that threw her out. She had begged at farms where no one wanted a widow with a child. Somewhere along the long miles, her voice for begging had died. She said only the truth. I'm lost. She didn't mean the roads. She knew every road around here. She meant her life. Grant looked into her face. He saw the shame she tried to hide. He saw the exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. And he saw the fierce way she held the baby, like she would die before she let anything take hope from her. That look was something he knew. He had carried that same look since the day he buried his wife, Anna. He gave his answer without hesitation. Then follow me home. No questions, no judgment, no pity. Just a door opening where every other door had closed. Ruth's throat tightened. I can't pay you. I didn't ask you to. Quote. Grant dismounted and started adjusting the stirrups. Can you ride? I can try. That's all any of us do out here, he said. Try or die trying. He helped her onto the horse, then climbed up behind her. Ruth felt the warmth of him through her thin shawl. Hope was wrapped safe between them, finally warm. As the horse began to move, Ruth felt something she hadn't felt in months, a heartbeat close to her own. Steady, strong, human. Snow began falling, soft at first, then angry and thick. How far? Ruth whispered. Far enough to leave whatever you're running from behind, Grant said. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 long weeks, she stopped counting the roads. The storm hit like a wall. Grant felt Ruth grip his coat. Hope made a small sound. He looked at the sky. His ranch was 2 hours away in good weather. In this storm, he might never reach it. But he knew another place, a trapper's cabin, an old line shack, only 20 minutes west. He chose safety over pride. The shack appeared through the blinding snow like an answer to a prayer. A low roof, a crooked chimney, and walls tired from years of storms. Grant helped Ruth down, kicked open the frozen door, and led her inside. The place was rough, dirt floor, cobwebs everywhere. But the fireplace was still good. Grant went to work fast. He built a fire. Sparks jumped, smoke curled, and slowly heat began to spread. Ruth settled into a corner, turning her back as she lifted her blouse to feed Hope. The baby clung to life with tiny, weak breaths. Ruth's ribs ached from how tightly she'd held her these past miles. Grant boiled snow for water in a tin cup. He shared jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. They ate in silence, not the uncomfortable kind, the kind born from pure exhaustion. Ruth noticed the Bible tucked in his gear. The pages were soft from long use, but he didn't open it. You read? She asked. Grant stirred the fire. My wife did. I listened. Ruth heard the past tense. She did not ask anything more. Out here, some questions were doors you didn't open. She watched him a long moment. Everything about him was careful. quiet strength, a steady hand. A man used to carrying a lot alone. "Why would you help someone you don't know?" she asked softly. He kept his eyes on the fire. "Maybe because I don't know you. And out here, that's reason enough." Ruth almost smiled, almost. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ruth Winslow." "Grant McCoy." He added another log to the fire. "Don't need to know more until you're ready." Something cracked inside her, not in a painful way, in a freeing way. Space. Respect. No one had given her that in a long time. As the fire warmed the cabin, Hope slept soundly for the first time in days. Ruth followed soon after, her body giving in at last. Grant sat by the fire, watching the flames dance across the walls. The storm screamed outside, but inside there was warmth. He took out Anna's Bible and ran his thumb over the cover. He didn't open it. Instead, he whispered to the flames, "Anna, if I'm wrong, tell me." The fire popped. A small spark leapt. Grant took that as answer enough. He kept the fire alive through the night, not for himself, for the woman and child sleeping in the corner. Two strangers who felt strangely like the first step towards something he thought he'd never feel again. A beginning. Ruth woke to the soft glow of dawn slipping through cracks in the wooden walls. The fire had burned low, but heat still clung to the cabin like a fragile promise. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she heard Hope's small breathing and saw Grant kneeling by the hearth, building the fire back up with quiet, practiced hands. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world bright and frozen. Grant turned toward her. "You're awake. Good. We should move while the cold is calm." They saddled up and rode through the quiet, white-covered forest. Hope was tucked between them, warm and calm. Ruth didn't speak much, but she watched the world with cautious hope. Every breath she took no longer hurt. Not as much. Grant's home appeared slowly through the trees, a sturdy cabin with smoke rising from the chimney. It stood in a clearing surrounded by tall pines. But as Ruth stepped inside, her heart tightened. The place felt frozen in time. 2 plates sat on the shelf, one used, the other untouched. A woman's shawl hung on a peg, covered in dust. A rocking chair faced the fireplace as if waiting for someone who would never sit in it again. Grant watched her quietly, almost bracing himself. "Stay till spring," he said. "Help with the house. I'll pay you wages. No questions asked." Ruth held Hope just a little closer. "Why would you do this?" Quote. Grant looked around the cabin, at the things he never moved, the memories he never touched. "Because this place is swallowing me whole, and maybe we both need saving." Ruth lowered her gaze. Fear and gratitude twisted inside her. "You should know what you're offering shelter to." He shook his head. "Don't need to." "Yes," she said. "You do." She stood straighter, as if preparing for judgment. "My husband died in a mine when I was 19. The town said I distracted him. They said I brought bad luck. I lost work, lost my home. Hope was born on the road. I've been walking ever since." Grant listened without interrupting. When she finished, he only nodded. "I built a life, a business, a home. Then Anna, my wife, went into labor while I was in town. I wasn't there. I came back too late. Lost her and the baby." His voice cracked just once. Ruth didn't step back from him. She didn't speak fear into his grief. She simply met his eyes. "The town will come," she whispered. "When they see me here, they'll come." "Let them," Grant said. "I stopped caring what people think when the only person who mattered stopped breathing." That night, for the first time in 2 years, he placed 2 plates on the table. They ate stew together, quietly, but not in sorrow. In peace. Hope cooed by the fire, healthy and warm. Winter came fast. But this time Ruth and Grant faced it together. Days became routine. Ruth cooked, cleaned, mended clothes. Grant chopped wood, repaired tools, checked trap lines. They moved around each other like 2 people learning a gentle dance. Hope thrived. She laughed when Grant made silly shadows on the wall. She reached for Ruth's cheeks with soft little hands. Slowly, the cabin began to feel alive again. One evening, Grant drew a shape on a piece of bark with charcoal. Curious, Ruth leaned over. "What is that?" "A cradle," he said. "Hope's outgrowing that basket." Ruth stared at the drawing. A cradle meant staying. A cradle meant roots. It made her chest tighten. "I want to help build it," she said. "You want to learn carpentry?" "I want to learn not to be afraid of tomorrow." So Grant taught her. In the woodshed, he showed her how to hold a plane, how to guide the wood. His hands wrapped around hers as he helped her angle the blade. It was the first touch between them that wasn't necessity. Ruth felt warmth bloom in her chest. The cradle began to take shape. Curved runners, smooth sides. Grant carved simple flowers on the headboard, flowers Anna had once loved. Ruth noticed but didn't speak of it. She only smiled softly and sanded the wood until her hands ached. Then, one afternoon, Reverend Silas rode up the long path. His gray mare steamed in the cold. His eyes found Ruth and narrowed, suspicion rising like a shadow. "Mrs. Winslow," he said. "Didn't expect to find you here." Ruth stood straight. "I am staying for winter." Grant stepped between them. "She's the housekeeper." Silas stared at Ruth again, disbelief clear. He left after getting water for his horse, but his expression said he carried more than water back to town. Ruth watched him go, her stomach nodding. She whispered, "He'll talk." "Let him," Grant said, splitting wood. "A man who preaches grace but doesn't give it isn't worth fearing." That night, Ruth paused outside the main room. She heard Grant reading aloud, slowly, haltingly, from Anna's Bible. His voice stumbled. He repeated words until they came out steady. He was learning to read scripture for her because she had once said she missed hearing it. Tears slid down her cheeks. But all the peace they were building shattered the night. Hope's fever came. It hit fast, hard, burning her tiny body. Ruth tried everything she knew. Cold cloths. Tea made from willow bark. Prayers whispered into the dark. But Hope's skin stayed burning hot. When Grant found her pacing with Hope at dawn, he asked only one question. "How long?" "Since midnight." He grabbed his coat. "I'm going to town for medicine." "It's 20 below. Another storm is coming," Ruth said. "You could die." Grant cupped her face gently. "If I don't go, she might. That's not a choice." He rode out into deadly cold. Ruth waited, hours bleeding into each other. Snow began to fall, hard. Her breath came fast and panicked. She told herself she had cursed him, that she brought ruin to every man who showed her kindness. Then, near midnight, hoofbeats. Grant stumbled through the door, face frozen gray, his hands clumsy, his breathing rough. But he held a small bottle. Doctors said 2 drops every 4 hours. Ruth gave Hope the medicine with shaking fingers, then turned to Grant. His fingertips were white, his cheeks red with frostbite. She pulled him to the fire and warmed his hands with hers, tears falling. "Why would you risk this?" she whispered. "For us," Grant murmured. "Because you're not lost anymore. And neither am I." Quote, Hope's fever broke by sunrise. Grant couldn't use his hands for a week. Ruth cared for him tenderly. She fed him soup, read to him, sat beside him as he slept. Each day the unfinished cradle sat waiting in the woodshed. Then came the thaw, and with it, trouble. 5 men rode toward the cabin. Ruth saw them through the window. "Grant," she whispered, "they're here." Sheriff Briggs, Reverend Silas, Banker Warren Kent, 2 others with tight faces, men who came to judge. They demanded answers, demanded Ruth be sent away or married to make things proper. The preacher called her a danger. The banker called her a shame. Grant opened his mouth to defend her, but his voice failed. Fear tightened around him. Ruth saw him fall silent. Saw him break. She stepped forward with her head high. "I'll leave. I won't be your burden." Grant froze, torn but silent. Ruth packed her small things, wrapped Hope against the cold, and walked past them all. past the men who came to destroy her, past Grant, who let fear silence him. She walked into the trees, alone once again. Ruth walked until her legs felt like wood, and the cold cut through her coat like knives. Hope slept against her chest, warm but too quiet. Snow crunched under Ruth's boots. The forest felt endless. She made it a mile before her strength gave out beneath a tall pine. She sank to the ground, knees hitting the frozen earth. She wrapped her coat tighter around Hope and whispered, "We've been lost before. We'll find another road." But her voice shook. She didn't believe it anymore. Back at the cabin, Grant stood frozen as the men rode away. Their words echoed in the cold air. Their warnings, their threats, their judgment. None of it mattered now. Only the empty space where Ruth had stood mattered. He went inside. The cabin was silent, too silent. Anna's shawl still hung on the peg, but it no longer held only memories. It held Ruth's scent now. Herbs, bread, warmth, life. His eyes fell on the 2 plates on the shelf, both worn from use, both meant for the family he'd thought he would never have again. And then he saw it, the unfinished cradle in the woodshed through the frost-covered window. A promise he made, a promise he broke. Grant opened Anna's Bible with shaking hands. A pressed wildflower fell out, the last flower Anna had picked before she died, the one he kept to remind him to be brave. He remembered her last words. "Don't let fear make you small." But he had. He slammed the Bible shut, grabbed his coat, and ran out the door. The sun was rising when he found Ruth slumped under the pine, snow gathering at her feet. She was unconscious, Hope tucked inside her coat, breathing in small puffs. Grant's heart cracked open. He lifted Ruth into his arms as if she weighed nothing, picked up Hope gently, and rode back faster than his horse should have allowed. Inside the cabin, he laid Ruth near the fire, wrapped her in every fur and blanket he owned. He fed the flames until the room glowed gold. He boiled broth and held it to her lips until she finally blinked awake. Her voice was faint. "Why?" Grant knelt beside her, tears streaking his face. "Because I was wrong. I let them make me small. I let fear choke me. But I won't let it take you, not again." "It's too late," Ruth whispered. Grant shook his head. "Ruth Winslow, listen to me." He took her hand, the same hand that had warmed his frozen fingers days ago. "I was lost too. You led me home. Now let me do the same." She stared at him, confused and tired. "What are you saying?" Grant reached into his coat and pulled out the wildflower, the one Anna had loved, the one he'd kept for courage. He placed it in Ruth's palm. "Anna would have stood for you. She'd have told me to be brave. And I should have been. I choose you, not because of them, not to quiet them, but because you're the first person who's made me feel alive since she died." Ruth looked at the wildflower, looked at Hope, sleeping warm now, looked at Grant, who was breaking open the fear he'd carried for 2 long years. She didn't answer with words. She pressed his bandaged hand to her cheek. Grant pulled her gently into his arms. "I choose you," he whispered again, "if you'll have me." Outside, winter wind howled. But inside, Ruth finally let the tears fall. All the tears she had held for months. Days passed. Ruth healed. Grant healed. And when the sun returned strong and warm, they rode into town together. Hope sat bundled between them. It was market day. People stared as they entered the square. Grant dismounted first, then helped Ruth down. He took her hand in front of everyone. Warren Kent stepped forward. "McCoy, come to your senses." "This woman." Grant cut him off with a voice the whole town heard. "This woman, Ruth Winslow, is my intended wife. Anyone who speaks against her speaks against me." Silence fell across the town. Reverend Silas stammered, "But the appearance." "You want scripture?" Grant pulled out the Bible, opened it to the marked page. His voice shook at first, then steadied. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay." He looked at Ruth. "She said that to me every day she stayed through winter. I'm just saying it back." The crowd was stunned. Then Martha Doyle, sharp-tongued, respected, stepped forward. "Well," she said, loud enough for all, the boy speaks true. Which of us hasn't needed grace?" The sheriff lowered his hat. A young mother walked up and handed Ruth a jar of preserves with an apologetic smile. An old rancher tipped his head at Grant. "Your Anna would be proud, son." Bit by bit, the crowd shifted. Judgment softened. The preacher bowed his head and whispered, "Forgive me." Warren Kent rode away, angry and alone. Grant helped Ruth onto the horse, and as they rode home, someone started clapping. Martha first, then others. Soon the whole square was full of applause. Not noise, but acceptance. That night, Ruth and Grant sat on the porch in 2 rocking chairs. Hope crawled in the grass, reaching for a butterfly. Inside, the cradle they worked on together now stood finished in the corner. Hope was already outgrowing it, but Ruth kept it as a sign of where everything began. Grant watched the mountains turn gold under the sunset. "You know the way home now," he said softly. Ruth took his hand. "I'm already there." The wildflowers they planted whispered in the breeze. Anna's flowers. Ruth's flowers. Blended together. Rooted in the same soil. 2 broken lives built again, 1 choice at a time, 1 act of courage at a time. Hope giggled, letting the butterfly go. And in that small cabin in Montana, love finally stayed.